I'm Phil Hilliker. I'm a writer and illustrator, and I'm excited to be in conversation here today with Tobias Dengel, author of The Sound of the Future, which also is the name of our topic for the day, here at the 2024 Virginia Festival of the Book. Separate those a little more. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of the Virginia Humanities, a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. In a moment, I'll introduce Tobias a little bit more, and he'll do a short reading from his book. But first, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. And when we get into the question and answer period about halfway through, volunteers will distribute surveys. So if you wouldn't mind answering those questions to help direct the future of the Festival of the Book, that would be great. There's also a QR code available on the survey if you would mind helping keep the festival alive. This is a free festival, but by no means is it free to produce. And the support of the community is really important. So we'd appreciate that. I'd also like to remind you, just one last reminder, that Tobias and I are individuals, and the comments that we make do not represent the views of the Festival of the Book. So when we become very controversial, know that it's just us. And I'd also like to thank the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsor, Michelle and David Baldacci. Without their support, this couldn't happen, and thank you to them. All right, so I think we are ready to jump in. So I'm going to read the bio off the back of your book because it's super official. Tobias Dengel is president of WillowTree, a global leader in digital product design and development with headquarters here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and offices throughout North America, South America, and Europe. WillowTree is now part of TELUS International and has been named by Inc. magazine to its list of America's fastest growing companies. I'd like to welcome Tobias.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me. Everyone, thank you for coming out this morning.
Would you mind giving us a short reading from a section of your book?
All right. So this book, like all books, was an extraordinary amount of work. And if I'd known how much work going into it, I'm not sure I would have done it. All right. Thank you. He's showing me the technology here. But we got to do a lot of interviews, and we talked to a lot of people about the history of this technology of voice, which is, I think we were very fortuitous in terms of our timing because we started talking about this 4 or 5 years ago. And as we were finishing up the book, all of a sudden ChatGPT came out, which is really the engine in many ways that is going to release voice technology into the world. And so we were really lucky that we had to finish our book last May for an October 2023 release. ChatGPT came out that November. So we actually, if you read the book, there's a lot of reference to LLMs and GPT, and the time that we live in right now is a really exciting time. But if you go back in history, one of the first manifestations of voice was Siri. And one of the most exciting things that I got to do as part of writing this book was interview Adam Shire, who's the founder of Siri, and who's a fascinating person. He's been working in voice since 1993. But I want to read a couple pages here about his experience starting Siri and then how that was acquired by Apple and became the first real voice experience that many of us had. And then we'll talk about what's not working with Siri and kind of where we're going to go from here. But so together with two partners, Shire set out to build a voice assistant that would embody his vision. In February 2010, they launched Siri as a free app available in Apple's App Store. Amid the explosion of interest in the iPhone and its amazing capabilities, Siri didn't appear to make an impact at first. Exaggerating more than slightly, Shire says, we were one of 200 million apps available back then. But 3 weeks later, Apple's Steve Jobs surprised the partners with a personal phone call. "Hey, it's Steve," he said. "How about coming over to my place to talk about Siri?" Of course, Shire and his partner were happy to meet with the legendary tech innovator. Jobs explained he was excited by Siri's potential, so much he wanted to buy Siri and reposition it as Apple's core voice product. Shire's team members were flattered by Jobs' interest. However, they just completed a successful round of financing and developed ambitious plans for marketing and promoting their product. So they weren't interested in entertaining acquisition offers. But Jobs persisted. He called Shire and his partners frequently in the weeks to come, and the sums he suggested as a possible purchase price kept increasing. Finally, in April 2010, the offer became irresistible. They agreed to sell Siri to Apple for a reported $200 million without ever having generated any revenues. But the question of how Siri would connect with users and with the ecosystem of the World Wide Web was still to be decided. Shire isn't shy about sharing, or wasn't shy about sharing his own vision with Jobs. As Shire says, "I said to Steve, many people think voice is going to replace the keyboard, but that's not how it's going to work at all. If all the information or the action you need is already on the screen, then the best way to access it is through clicking a mouse or tapping an icon. But if what you need isn't on the screen, the easiest way is to ask for it. That's where voice will come in. The perfect interface will be when you can mix direct manipulation with conversational interaction so seamlessly that you don't even think about it. After all, that's what humans do in other contexts every day." Steve Jobs fully grasped Shire's vision of what Siri could become, and Shire believes that he shared it. But Jobs' plan for launching Siri as the voice of Apple ended up not embodying that vision. Initially, Jobs preferred to have Siri operate within a narrower sphere, accessing a limited set of applications approved by Apple rather than serving as a portal to every site on the World Wide Web. Shire paraphrases Jobs' attitude as, "Web services are great, but Apple also has an app ecosystem. So we'll start with the 10 apps that Apple ships with every iPhone, calling, messaging, news, weather, etc. Later, we'll open it up to Siri developers, and by then, Siri will control access to every app on the phone and every service on the web." Jobs also wanted Siri to interact using voice only, reasoning that this unique connection to technology would intrigue and delight users. "I think Steve saw it from a marketing point of view, the novelty of voice," Shire says. "I believe that was the main incentive, and on that point, he was absolutely right." Jobs' alternative version of how Siri would initially be implemented by Apple was pursued. Following his lead, for more than a year after the deal was reached, Shire and his team, now part of Apple, worked to perfect Siri for a relaunch in the fall of 2011. Through that period, Jobs' health was an evolving story in the background of everything Apple did. Back in 2004, he publicly revealed the fact that he was battling against a rare form of pancreatic cancer. For years, he remained thoroughly engaged in running the company he'd founded, and his cancer appeared to be largely under control. But then matters became more serious. In June 2009, it became known that Jobs had received a liver transplant 2 months earlier. In 2011, Jobs took a medical leave of absence while announcing he planned to remain the CEO and participate in every major company decision. Sometimes hard for CEOs to leave. There are many stories of people near death who struggled to remain alive in order to experience one more event of deep personal importance to them. History buffs know how both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams managed to remain alive until finally expiring on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary to the day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. For Steve Jobs, a dream that kept him going in the final months of his life, even as his health failed, was his wish to see Siri launched. Jobs did live to see that launch on October 4th, 2011, before dying the very next day. So one of the kind of main reasons we wrote this book is to explain why we think voice is going to be such a game-changing interface to our devices, but why we've done it wrong for so long. And this conflict between Shire and Jobs around how voice would manifest itself on the machine is kind of the core of of that disagreement. And I think what we as a tech industry have gotten wrong about voice and what's about to change.
Yeah, in your introduction, it's fascinating because you said that smart speakers have enjoyed the fastest adoption rate of any new technology in human history.
Till ChatGPT, yes.
Right. So your book's already a little bit,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're dated.
But you also, you lean on this idea that we're simply doing voice wrong. And we want nothing to do with smart speakers. We want them to be smart mics. Like, can you talk about how we're doing this wrong and how interaction can be different?
Yeah. So when you think about why do we want voice interfaces to our devices, it's at the end of the day, speed. We can speak 3 times as fast as we can type. And on a mobile device, you can speak about 5 times as fast as you can type. So anything in technology that is faster is going to win. The problem is we also listen very slowly compared to reading or compared to looking at images. And so when Jobs wanted to have Siri be a voice-to-voice experience because he thought that it would be a great marketing gimmick, which it was, he was missing the point that it actually slows things down tremendously if you have to listen to a device. And what's interesting, the example I always use is ordering, finding a movie to go to tonight, right? All of us want to ask Siri or ask our phones what movies are playing. Super easy to do. None of us want to listen to Alexa or Siri give us 5 movies with 3 showtimes each. I mean, that was movie phone. That was 20 years ago. And we're just replicating that experience. What you really want is the movies just to show up on the apps as you're asking it. You're looking at the Regal Cinemas app and then just say, all right, 2 tickets to Star Wars at 8 p.m. And that's going to be the interface of the future where we speak, but we're actually not listening to devices, where it's a multimodal experience.
Yeah. So do you mind going into a little bit more detail about multimodal, like all of the different ways that we are going to be interacting with technology?
Yeah. So I think there's going to be, and again, to the point you made about, calling it smart speakers versus smart mics, that the whole terminology is backwards, right? When Amazon launched Alexa, they also got it backwards. They also try to go into these conversational assistants, Alexa, instead of a screen experience where ideally there's going to be mics all around our house. We don't have to take our phone out. But the response is going to be, again, then on the phone. Then you will have to take the phone out to get the answer because it's so much faster than listening. And so how does that manifest itself? It manifests itself that almost every human device interaction is going to be voice first. You're going to talk to your apps instead of typing, swiping, et cetera. You're going to dictate anything that you want to write because we can, again, speak 3 times faster. So imagine everything that every employee in the world types, right, which is an extraordinary amount of effort and time every single day, now becomes 3 times as fast. Yeah. And what was holding it back, right, is all the correction and the syntax. Up until the LLMs got to where they are right now, if you if you dictated something into a phone or into a word processing, et cetera, there'd be no syntax. It wouldn't know where to put periods. It wouldn't know where to put paragraphs, et cetera. But that's what LLMs, ChatGPT are so good at. They can then instantly take what you've created and make it perfect grammatically, and punctuation wise, et cetera, and they can correct it for you. And so these 2 technologies working together are going to change everything. We see it in our industry. Our design work is now about a third AI. Our software development's about 25% AI. This is in 18 months. Like in 3 years, it's going to be 70% AI first.
So do you mind, just for folks in the audience who might not know all the terms, can you give some background on ChatGPT, LLMs, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so LLMs are large language models. So there's a quote in the book that the head of Google's AI programs, they for years have been trying to get their systems to understand human language. And He famously said, every time I hire another linguist, the model gets worse. And because it's extraordinarily complicated, you cannot figure out language using traditional programming approaches, which are basically an if-then statement. If this, then that. If this, then that. He also at the Consumer Electronics Show in 2020 in Vegas, right before COVID, he said, here's a statistic that'll blow your mind. They have found on Google Assistant that there's 4,000 ways in English that people set their alarms. Now you'd think there'd be 5 or 10, I don't know, 20, 4,000, right? And that just shows that's a very, very, very simple task. That shows the complexity of human language. And so you apply that to, the entire expanse of human language, and this is where you get into trouble. Trying to create these models. Now, the LLMs have gotten very good at it, but they're far from perfect. They still have a lot of work to do. And I think one of the key points in the book is it's not going to be that we have these assistants that do everything that are going to change our lives. It's not going to be Siri that changes our life, because Siri has to know everything about the human experience in order to it basically has to be a human, right? And we're still a long ways from that. But if you have an intelligent banking app or an intelligent, movie finding app, that assistant only has to know about movies and banking. And that's a much more bounded problem. And that's how all this is going to start. We're basically going to have assistants that are very specific, because that's easy to train, easy to program, easy to test.
Wow. So yeah, in the book, you actually, in terms of language, use the example of recognized speech, and like the phrase recognized speech, and how sometimes that could be interpreted as wreck this beach, right? And like all the work that even just like simple phrases could be misunderstood by computers.
Yeah, so we've all experienced it, right? How many times have you said something to your to your app or to Siri, and it's the synonym that's being used, or it's just not getting it right? But this again is going to be solved by the LLMs, by Gen AI, because if you've noticed, if you're a big Siri user, even in the last 3 to 6 months, the correction mechanism has massively improved. And you'll notice sometimes you speak into the phone, and then like 3 or 4 seconds later, it autocorrects itself and figures out what you were really trying to say. It's because they're applying a Gen AI model to what you said. And they said, hey, this is what we transcribed, but we don't think it makes a lot of sense. This is probably what this person meant. And so that's how the that's how fast it's evolving. And I think this week there was a big story that Apple's going to be licensing one of the big, it's either going to be OpenAI or one of them, but this is exactly what they're going to be doing with it, is every interaction you have the phone is going to get filtered through Gen AI in order to make it much more accurate in predicting what you actually said or wanted it to do.
So it's using context of things you've said before and after and that sort of thing to kind of figure out the path.
Exactly, right. Based on all the, these large language models, they basically have all human text in them.
Yeah.
So they're basically just looking at everything that humans have ever written and then saying, oh, this person probably meant X.
So then this is a super promising technology. What is distinguishing this technology from other technologies in the past that have been promising at the start, but have fallen by the wayside, right? 3D TVs, or even the Concorde. Right?
Yeah.
Like we have these super cool things, but
Google
just
Glasses.
don't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, it all comes down to what human needs does it solve, right? And that's where technology goes sideways, is that there are super interesting and exciting technologies that seem great in a lab, but what are they really solving? 3D TV is a great example, right? If you were at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas in 2010, you would have been told by 2015, 80% of American households will have 3D TVs. None of us have 3D TVs. Usually when I say that, someone raises their hand. You must have a lot of time on your hands if you're watching 3D TV. But it's because it didn't solve a human need, right? It was cool. It looked amazing. I would put Oculus and I would put Google Glass in that list as well. It is just not enough. Now, it has very specific applications around gaming, et cetera, but as a general purpose technology, it doesn't. Speech or conversational AI is completely different because it is so much faster. It's 3 times as fast. And so it solves an extraordinary need. There are other ancillary benefits as well, right? One is safety. The interface, humans interact with machines in all sorts of different ways. And usually when that breaks down is when large safety issues happen. So the Boeing 737 MAX accidents, in each of those, the pilots knew that the plane was doing something they didn't want it to do, and they didn't know how to stop it, right? And so voice commands would have instantly ended those tragedies. Same with the Deepwater Horizon. That went on for 3 days. People were trying to figure out how to stop the machines from doing something they didn't want to do. And this isn't just theory. Stanford's developed technology for oil rigs that's all voice-based to address that issue. Both the US and the Russian Air Forces have voice-first cockpits now for this exact reason. They just want to be able to tell the plane what to do. Why should we have like buttons and screens, et cetera? And so that's kind of where everything is going. Every interface is going to be voice first. It's kind of, when you start thinking about it, you're like, that makes so much sense. Like if you go to a physician now, at least for me, my physician is typing the whole time. Like they're listening to me and typing what I'm saying into a device. That makes zero sense. You've got an extraordinarily well-trained professional. As soon as I say it, that information is out in the world. The device should pick it up directly and transcribe it way more efficiently, way faster. And you think about, restaurants, waiters, waitresses, what are they doing? They're receiving information from a human being and then they're like sitting there like for 3 times as long as you took to say it, like typing it into the system to get your order in. Again, all of that's going to be transformed to be instant and error-free.
Yeah. You were just talking about speed and safety and all that kind of stuff, but you also say in the book that fun is a crucial ingredient of any technology breakthrough. How is this going to be fun?
Well, lots of different ways. So fun meaning entertainment, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking. So, Val Kilmer in the latest Top Gun movie, he doesn't have his voice, right? And so how was that created? They simulated his voice and created an avatar. That I think that is the first known kind of, high fidelity use of these kinds of voice avatars. Today, literally this morning, a company called Character AI released that they have, if you're following all the AI stuff, you can create characters quite easily as of a couple months. Like going back 18 months, you could create images. You prompt the system, say, create me an image of XYZ. All right. 6 months ago, we started seeing pretty good movies, but silent. As of today, like literally this morning, I just posted it on LinkedIn. They've released voice that you can put your own, with a 10-second snippet of your own voice sample, you can create a character, program it to do anything that speaks in your voice. So that is super fun. I had, we have an office in Brazil. I had to give a address for the holidays, and I created an avatar and I typed in English what I wanted myself to say, and then it translated it into Portuguese in my voice.
Huh.
And the folks on the other side, there was absolutely perfect Portuguese, and my lips were in sync. It was
fascinating.
So is that fun? It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Until it's misused.
Right. I was just about to ask that, right? Like if we can do this, 6 months ago, there was that terrible video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, right? That just did not look remotely real. But now, with Sora and these character AIs, like it's moving very quickly. Where are the guardrails?
So this is the scary part. There are no guardrails, right? To the extent, to the extent that, OpenAI and others are putting guardrails on and putting watermarks on. They have to be accepted, but the reality is most of these models are now open source. And so if you want to use these models for something nefarious, you just use an open source version. You don't use the official version. And so we spent a lot of time on this, and I get asked about this a lot. Education is going to have to be the primary mechanic, and trusted sources, right? We are going to a world very quickly where things that you see on social media and or the web generally, not that you could ever really trust it, but we're getting to a point where we're going to have videos of Joe Biden that are completely false. I mean, we already have them, but it's going to be so real that unless you're aware, you're going to believe it. Same with Donald Trump. And, there's going to be misinformation in the war in Russia. I think in Russian media, in state media, they already had a version of Zelensky saying things that he didn't say, created by, and like if you're watching the state news, like in those kinds of regimes, in a totalitarian regime, misinformation is going to be incredibly, incredibly powerful. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't even know what question to ask next after that. So let's go towards, we're at a book festival. Let's bring it up a little bit. There are some book fans in the audience, I'm sure. How is this voice technology going to impact the publishing industry?
Yeah, so I think it.
Oh no.
This is a good one. Amazon recently put a limit because there were so many authors publishing books using Gen AI that Amazon decided to limit how many books per week an author could publish. Does anyone know what they started at? This is like 2 months ago. 100. So Amazon's taking a strong stand on this. If you publish more than 100 books a week, they think that you might be using AI.
Maybe a little bit.
So again, it's the combination of Gen AI and conversational AI, and I think it's interesting that the adoption is it follows a bathtub curve, meaning it's very high in youth, like 18 and under, and then it dips, and then it's very high 60 and over.
Oh, interesting.
And the thesis is that, I mean, the younger generation, I think the thesis is obvious, like they like new technology. My 11-year-old son, I like to tell this story because it's so him. We got in a big discussion. He was in trouble for something or another, and he goes up to Google and he asks, hey, Google, what boarding schools accept sixth graders? And then Google gave him the answer, like some academy in New Hampshire. And he said, hey, Google, write me an application for blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of where the mindset is. And he does stuff like, I'm like, have you been using Gen AI for your papers? He's like, yeah, but I figured this out. I have to tell it to write like an 11-year-old or my teacher figures it out.
Oh no.
So his prompt is like, write a story about blah, 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 make it sound like an 11-year-old. And then, that. So anyway, the younger generation is totally into this. They're going to be using it for everything. They want to use voice for like finding TV shows, like every interaction is voice first. Over 60, the thesis is that that generation never, like they didn't have to type everything when they were younger. And so typing to them just isn't as natural, and a lot of like two-thumb typing, especially on the phones. And so voice is even more efficient as a medium if you're not, if you're not typing at 60, 80, 100 words a minute.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll throw it to the audience. I'm going to put you in the hot seat and ask you to predict what's happening in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And, I want you to say, what are your realistic predictions, and what would be your pie in the sky, what you would like to see?
Yeah. So I think as I said, every interaction that we have with machines is going to be reinvented as voice first. The way it's going to manifest itself, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years is every app we use is going to have a giant mic button in the middle, which Spotify already does. Waze now has. But we're basically going to talk to our apps. And the downside of that is it's annoying enough to have everyone on their phones walking around. Now everyone's going to be on their phones talking to them all the time. But it's that's going to happen, and it's going to be incredibly efficient, right? It's everything that's annoying and frustrating about mobile devices applications is going to get that much easier. And so it's really important for industry leaders to understand that, because how fast you implement these new technologies is going to be a differentiator, a competitive differentiator in your market. I think we're going to, like any technology, we're going to see a lot of false starts, right? One of the big announcements this year was the voice-powered refrigerator by Samsung. I mean, I just don't get it, but like any new technology, is going to be a lot of stuff. You're like, they don't really need to do it in that way,
Right.
So there will be flops as well. I think the more difficult piece is around the ethics of what is this going to mean for fraud, right? We have people calling senior citizens posing as their children. So my voice is out there, right? I've done interviews, et cetera. Any of these technologies can completely simulate my voice and get my voice to say anything. So someone could very easily use my voice to call my father and have me say, "Hey, I'm in trouble. I need $5,000. Can you wire it here?" And so again, the only way to deal with this is education. Like the only way is that people, and I think that's the real risk here, is that in a world that is less trusting than it seems has ever been,
Right.
is going to become even less trusting by necessity, because you can't trust what you're seeing anymore and what you're hearing. The things that we thought we could still trust are now also in doubt. And I think my hope, right, is that any new technology is an arms race, right? So when we first had websites and first had accounts, the password protection was weak. There were a lot of cracks, et cetera. And we've gotten into two-factor authentication. It's a cat and mouse game always between, the white hats and the black hats in terms of like how the technology evolves. And I think right now, the fraudulent side of the house has advantages because they're earlier, right? But my hope is that the industry unites, and it has to be the industry. It can't be the government. It's too slow. It doesn't understand the details. It has to be the major players that come together and lock it down. And they don't have a great history of it, right? It's just a fact. Like Meta does not have a great history of this. They're a major player in the space. OpenAI, frankly, does not have a great history. I mean, you talk about books, they basically stole every book in the world, and whether it's
to build their algorithm.
whether it's still protected, the IP is still protected or not, to build their algorithm, they just did it. And so I think the industry is going to have to step up, because government is going to have a really hard time doing it.
And do you think, sorry, I know I said my last question was my last question, but do you think that like users can play a part in forcing them to step up?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the government policy can force the industry to take action, right? And I think we as citizens have to hold our politicians accountable that this is an important, you're laughing, that this is
dubious.
You're dubious, that this is going to be a real issue. And I think usually the way this happens is not anything's going to happen until some bad things happen. There's some bad stories. So I don't want to, this is a reality, right? But at the same time, the promise of this technology and what it's going to unleash is just extraordinary. My company runs contact centers where the folks that work there have to answer very, very basic questions all day long from very frustrated consumers on password resets, on this and that. And all that kind of thing is going to get automated that allows human beings to focus on much more creative things, right? Every new technology, we originally get concerned about, here are all the job losses, et cetera. But what no one can see is the jobs that get created. And we've had an incredible track record of having new technologies, whether it's computers, et cetera, that automate things that used to be done manually, but still on a net basis. Different jobs, but more jobs get created.
And it's going to take time for those to.
And there's a a time of converting, et cetera. But I'm super excited that a lot of the rote things we do are going to become much easier, right? You're not very far from being able to use this technology to help you in a very, very productive way write a book or create a presentation or kind of anything that is based on this kind of creative effort is just going to get a lot more fun and efficient, right? Like when I have to work on a presentation at work, the ideas take me a quarter of the time. It's 3/4, like getting the formatting just right and moving this and getting the fonts just right. And that's all going to go away and be automated. And you're just going to be able to tell the system, hey, make a slide for me in the style of XYZ that makes these 4 points. And it's just going to be like, boom. So it'll make life much more enjoyable. So as long as we can get the fraud component under control.
Thank you for answering my questions. Yes. Let's go out to the audience. Does anybody have a question? Go ahead.
The Wall Street, Washington Post did a live summit yesterday on future of technology. And obviously a lot of it focused on disinformation because that's the most immediate thing it seems from their perspective that you're going to have to deal with. And a lot of it was very discouraging because we've never really got regulations through government for the internet itself or any other problem that's come of it. But they did one presentation where they had someone who's representing a company that is artificial intelligence, vetting artificial intelligence. And they did a series of examples. And the last example was an example of the California coastline around Big Sur. And then someone literally through voice describing it, saying, I want to see it. And they weren't identical, but AI itself could not, that's the only thing they found, could not determine which was real, which had been done with promise. My question is, do you see that as a potential salvation, that AI, vetting AI will be something we're not really seeing yet, but that could be very quickly?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I repeat a little bit of the question just for the live stream, just in case? The question was about AI potentially being used to vet other AI to authenticate them.
Yeah, so that is the latest thinking and the latest approaches. So, and it's, over the last 6 months, people have figured this out. So everyone has heard about hallucinations. Hallucinations are caused by, what we call hallucinations are caused by two things. Either bad data in the system that the AI can't figure out is bad data versus good data. I'll give you an example. We were, for our parent company, TELUS, launching some AI assistants. And one of the questions that consumers ask is, what is the best iPhone? And the system was saying, the iPhone 10. We're like, that's not exactly right. Why is that happening? Well, the issue is that the documents that the AI was trained on included all the documents and all the web pages that have ever been released by the company. And when the iPhone 10 launched, there was a web page that said the iPhone 10 is the best iPhone. So the AI wouldn't know that that is not the current information, right? So you're dealing with stuff like that. Now, and then there's hallucination where you just can't figure it out. Like, why? I don't know why the system said X, Y, Z. But what we found is that exactly that. You have two models that are interrogating each other at the same time, where one model says something and then you have another model say something, and then you might have a third model that compares the two and figures out, like, if they're saying the same thing, it's probably right. If they're saying different things, it might not be right. Let me figure it out. So the learning is you can't really get rid of these hallucinations, but you can make sure they don't get out into the wild because you take them through 2 or 3 different AI models. And I think that's exactly the same concept, right? Is you're going to use AI to test other AI. And there are today still markers that will tell you if you're using enough technology that you can figure out, is this an AI generated version of my voice versus not? Because there's just telltale signs. But again, it's a cat and mouse game as to which side of it is more developed than the other. But that will be a big part of the answer, is using AI to check the AI.
I'm looking for hope. So
Yes, no, I mean, that's right. Yeah.
I'd like you to explain something to me about this hallucination business. Well, I'm an attorney, so I got all worked up over this AI making up cases. Now, I can understand why AI would make a mistake or not know something, but how does it create something that doesn't exist out of thin air? Why would it do that? If it's looking for patterns, well, how does it do that?
There are a lot of theory. I mean, the reality is that people don't really exactly know.
Yeah, that's the
Right.
scary part.
Yeah. So because these models are so massive, right? Think about they have every single case that's ever been, heard, that's documented in the system. And then they're trying to draw inferences from those cases. And by definition, the way they do that is they connect dots from different cases. And so they're just connecting dots in ways that are inaccurate, right? Somewhere in the system was the information that the AI put out, but it was in some completely unrelated place. And so it's somehow putting together and synthesizing information that shouldn't be synthesized. It's just a much more advanced version, I think, of the example I used on the old iPhone. It's just putting together data sets and that we as humans would recognize as not accurate. So how are we dealing with that?
The example of the iPhone, it got it from somewhere.
Yes.
But it didn't get this case from somewhere because it doesn't exist.
Well,
It made it up. That
Yeah.
scares me to death.
Yeah. So so if you look at how did these models get developed, right? The original LLM models. The joke in the industry is it's artificial intelligence. It's humans, right? So what did they do? How does AI differentiate between a dog and a cat? They basically fed the model tens of thousands of images of dogs and cats and said, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a cat. And eventually the system recognized on its own what a dog and a cat was. And early days, it would get it wrong 1% of the time, then 0.5% of the time. Now the dog and cat problem is pretty much solved, but the legal case problem is not solved. So how are they dealing with it? They're having lawyers annotate the outputs of these cases into the AI and tell the AI, this was right, this was wrong, this is right, this is wrong. And there's tens of thousands of lawyers who, yes, there are. I think, some of these professionals get paid $100 to $150 an hour just feeding data back into the AI system.
You did say it was going to create jobs.
There you go. I mean, it's created a lot. Yeah.
But writing a page should be no different than writing a book. You say, write this case. You could write a book about 18th century, something France. They got to start and make up something. So they're starting. They know what a case looks like. They start.
Well, that was if you prompted. I think the issue that came up was a lawyer was using Gen AI to make a case, and the AI referenced cases as case law that didn't even exist. And so that was the big mystery of.
Those books don't exist either. I don't see if it can do one.
Well, because the AI doesn't know what the difference is necessarily between fiction and fact. Yeah. It's just a giant pattern recognition and pattern kind of creation engine. Yep.
Can you talk to me about EMFs and whether we have all of these things, like we set speakers in our homes, is the electromagnetic fields in our homes going to be concerning?
The question was if all of these devices are capable of creating an electromagnetic field that could be concerning.
I don't know the answer to that. My wife always tells me that if there's a negative impact from these phones, I'm going to have a giant cancer, the shape of a phone in the side of my head in 20 years. But I'm sorry, I don't know. Yeah.
The second question, and I guess you don't know, but I'm still wondering, if you project into the future, what's going to happen to our public school system and elementary schools when kids don't have to ever learn times tables, division, how to write, essay. How will that affect the human brain?
So the question is, how is this going to affect education and learning and eventually the human brain?
So the question of how not writing to create content, the act of writing, that disappearing, and math impacts the human brain is one. There are a lot of people that are deeply interested in that question, because the way we, and again, this is some similar questions were asked 30 years ago when we went from writing on, either by typewriter or by hand to word processing, where everything was like more auto-corrected, et cetera. And so I think, spelling as an art has been lost for 20 years in many ways. But there's a lot of, I think, research, and it's a really interesting place to explore, is what if you create a book or create content, but you don't have to write every word, or you don't have to write any of the words, you say the words. What does that do to the actual brain? Because if you're writing, like this book was all written, obviously in Word on a word processor, but the act of writing is a very physical act of typing and of watching these things on a screen. And there's a process to it that's going, your mind is moving at a certain rate while you're doing that. I don't know, right? But it is a really interesting place to study, and there's a lot of work being done on that. Like, what does education mean at all? If every fact, the internet already kind of broke that open. Like, why do you have to learn facts when you can ask Google any fact in history, right? And so you need certain context. What context do you need? I will say my kids' education is already very different than mine was. Like, I was all about writing and all about learning facts, and history was about lots of facts, and math was about learning X, Y, Z. And their education is much more for worse, right?
You do have an example in how voice technology will impact reading scores, or like the Lexan scores, and how that will improve the ability to figure out like children's reading level and where they are and where they might be falling short.
Yeah. So, we've spent time on some of the negatives. One of the incredible positives of this technology is going to be the level of teaching and education globally is going to change completely, because you can have the world's best educator, in theory, educating every kid, or you can have a simulation of the dean of the Harvard Medical School teaching a medical class in Kenya. Now, you could say, well, what do you mean by that? What is, you could do that in video, you could do that. There's lots of ways, but it's not interactive. And so our company actually has developed, working with McGraw-Hill, a prototype of teaching medical students using voice technology and Gen AI together. And so what we've done is we've simulated a patient, and the medical student starts asking it, the patient comes in and says, I'm feeling XYZ. And the medical student has to ask it, just like it would a real patient, like, what are your symptoms? And the medical student can order tests, and the tests show up right away on the screen. And then they have to go through the same process they would with a patient, And so that I think is going to be things like that are going to really help education, make it much more interesting. And you can have an interview with Alexander the Great or whatever it is. That's the exciting part of the technology.
Yeah. Other questions?
How much of this technology will actually reside locally on your device versus requiring connectivity and good connectivity with that?
The question is, how much of this technology is going to live locally on your device versus living, say, on the cloud or requiring connectivity?
Yeah, so the trend is whenever a technology becomes ubiquitous enough and important enough, they try and get it on the device. And early in the life cycle, because it requires so much compute power, it sits in the cloud. And voice transcription has followed that path. Right now, the large language models are still in the cloud, like if you interface with ChatGPT, but the transcription as of 2 years ago on most devices happens real time on the device. And so, again, there's still a ways to go with transcription, especially for people with accents, et cetera, et cetera. But 4 or 5 years ago, if you talk to Siri, it would take 3-4 seconds because it had to bounce off the cloud and back. Now the transcription happens locally. Now it usually doesn't know what to do because it still has to ask another system what do these words mean. But the act of transcribing the words that you say to actually be text on the screen is happening locally. But that's a really important part because there's this thesis, like all these developers believe, like they rely on perfect connectivity, and most of us do not have that. Yeah.
So I have a friend that's recently gone blind. So Siri has become her best friend, and she certainly uses Siri quite a bit. And she has a talking washer and dryer. She does not have a talking refrigerator. What does she have to look forward to in tools that will make her life easier?
Yeah. So accessibility is another great story that we didn't talk about. There's a whole, language translation is really important, especially smaller languages. So, there's 600-700 or 7,000 languages in India. Most of those languages are not digitally supported, but will now become digitally supported through these large language models because they're going to be able to apply them to those languages quite quickly. But in terms of accessibility, so an example is a Vocable app that our company actually released because we had one of our developers whose girlfriend had GBS, and she was completely incapacitated. And if you're incapacitated in that way, and you can only move your eyes, the way that you communicate is that a caregiver has a giant board, and they point to different letters, and you can move your eyes up or down, which is obviously an excruciatingly slow way to communicate. So 3-4 years ago, we developed a way that using eye tracking on the iPhone, you can just look at the letter and you can just look. And if you pause on a letter for more than a second, it types it for you. So that was a big advance. Then we said, all right, we can kind of predict what people want. So we started putting words in it. But now with Gen AI, the app actually listens to what a caregiver is saying. So if a caregiver is asking, are you hot or cold? The app hears that real time and then generates a prompt that says hot or cold onto the phone. And then you look at the right answer. And we could get to almost normal levels of conversation by normal velocity of conversation through this mechanic of actually the system pre-populating what the likely response is. It's got a great use of Gen AI because that's what it's so good at, is pattern recognition.
I was shocked to read in the book that Siri, Alexa, and Google Assistant, none of them have any languages that are native to Africa. So it's fascinating to know that it's going to be opening up.
Yeah, the issue with languages is it took before these large language models an extraordinary amount of time, effort, and cost to digitize a language. So it was really the largest language. I mean, it's the largest languages with the largest markets. I will also say this: Asia is far ahead of the United States or North America, South America, Europe in terms of voice adoption, because of the issues that the speed advantage in Asian languages is even greater than in English, for example, because it's just, with all the character, it's just so much more difficult to use a keyboard to type. And so if you go to China or Japan, I mean, it's already like no one types. I mean, everyone's just speaking to their devices the entire time.
We have time for one more question.
As more of this stuff goes on your device, I've really got two questions. How does the chip industry going to keep up with this? Is it possible? And keep the device at this very tiny size that everybody demands? And secondly, as this adds on to the electrical usage, as all this AI and all this advancement, it's kind of like Bitcoin, and expands the demand for electricity dramatically. How do we do anything about global warming with electrical demands growing at a geometric pace? And all the stuff we could do with automobiles may be wasted.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have the answer for global warming, but it is a fact that the demand for electricity, at least in computing, is accelerating rapidly. There are other obviously areas where the demand for electricity is going down, but the chip industry is going to be this. I mean, it goes without saying, it's a boom time. If you bought NVIDIA 18 months ago, congratulations. But that boom, we're just in the first innings of that, because the demand for compute power around these models is extraordinary, right? And it's analogous to, the transition from the 60s to the 1980s, when you had supercomputers and mainframes, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, everyone in their house had a computer that was more powerful than a mainframe was 10 years earlier. That's the trend we're on right now, is the amount of compute power that you need to process all this is going to get to the local device. And so the innovation on the chip side is going to get, and we see that right now, is going to get accelerated because the demand is just massive. Nora, I'll take one.
I'll ask you later.
All right.
All right. So Tobias is going to do a book signing in the back. There are books for sale. So if you have additional questions, it's an opportunity to both buy a book, support the festival and Tobias, and get your question answered. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you to the Virginia Festival of the Book.